Hello and welcome to the Newchip online demo week for January 2021. My name is Armando Vera Carvajal and I'm the Accelerator Director here at Newchip. We're so excited to have hundreds of investors and entrepreneurs joining us here today from all around the world. If you didn't already know it, this is our biggest demo week ever. We have 147 global startups in the Newchip Accelerator sharing their stories this entire week with the goal of spreading awareness of the products they are building and the impact that they intend to make on this planet. To kick off today, I would love to introduce you to Sonali Damle, an international business leader at the Bain Innovation Exchange, which is part of Bain & Company, one of the most prestigious consultancies in the world. She's here for a talk around building and learning new business ventures in high growth global organizations. Sonali, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you here at Newchip. Before we dive in, I'd love to share some details on your background to share a little bit of context with our global audience on who you are and how amazing your experiences are. Sonali is an international business leader with experience in building and leading new business ventures. She likes to think of herself as a dreamer and a doer, which is very important. She has a very deep interest in understanding the unmet customer need and also developing the mechanism, people, processes, marketing, and funding to make a good idea a reality. Sonali's expertise lies in translating those ideas into scalable, highly resilient businesses that successfully navigate and operate in dynamic, fast-paced global economies. She's very passionate about building sustainable organizations by developing a depth of talent and inspiring leadership to lead both the financial and non-financial goals of dynamic, high-growth organizations. Currently, Sonali is Executive Vice President at the Bain Innovation Exchange, which has the mission to forge startup partnerships for corporate clients and effectively turbocharge their disruption and innovation journey. Now, the Bain Innovation Exchange connects startups, accelerators, venture capitalists, and corporates to unleash game-changing ideas to build the future today. She considers herself a serial entre and intrapreneur, this being her second business that she's helping build at Bain. Prior to this, Sonali spearheaded the Global Centers of Expertise model, and she built the Bain Capability Network, or BCN. In this capacity as the head of BCN, Sonali grew the business from an idea to a more than 500-person team, serving clients across industrial and functional areas, incubating new AI-based tools, and also accelerating the pace and cost to serve consulting client needs. Prior to earning her MBA in finance at Wharton, Sonali founded her first startup in New York in the early 2000s, focused on geospatial mapping of survey and aerial photography data to inform construction at major infrastructure hubs, such as ports. She has since been an advisory board member on various early stage ventures. And of course, outside of work, Sonali has a keen interest in sustainability and mentorship, which is so important in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. She enjoys exploring new places with her spouse and two kids. She's curious about history and cultures, art, music, food. And she's also fascinated by people with diverse worldviews. And she's always game to go on adventurous sports all the way from scuba to skydiving. Wow. Sonali, it's such a pleasure once again to have you here joining us at Online Demo Week. Welcome.
Thank you. Wow, I'm feeling very impressed at your ability to say all those good things about me. I am so happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
No, absolutely. It's such a pleasure. Look, to start this conversation, as I was mentioning when I was talking about your bio, you've been a leader for many years at Bain & Company, one of the most prestigious and influential consultancies in the world. You know, I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about what the past 14 years, right, leading in this multinational firm has taught you about developing a highly competitive global business in today's fast-changing world. Can you walk us through that journey?
Sure. So my journey started about 14 years back. I had two very little kids who had very little influence into what I was going to do with my life at the time. We moved from New York, packed our bags, moved to India to head up, which was what was a very small, but a highly successful experiment in Bain called the Bain Capability Network. It was called the Bain Capability Center back then. It had about 50 people, 40 something. And the mandate was to really make it successful and scale it and make sure that we were hiring talent and producing the quality of work that is only expected of a strategy consulting firm. Small feat, right? I thought I was going to go for a couple of years. I ended up staying for 7, and we grew it to become a multinational organization that pivoted from being more of a cost center, research-oriented organization to, serving end clients in what we call the global centers of expertise, which is, once strategy consulting is done, our clients still need a lot of help on a number of our products, not all of them, to be able to serve the needs on an everyday basis, the analytics required and the sort of research required. And so we would come in and we helped clients doing that. Did that for a long time. And then it was time again to move. And we picked Houston, not so much for any reason other than the fact that my husband is in oil and gas. I am now working with the Bain Innovation Exchange, and you introduced that. And so this is another one of those amazing Bain ideas. Bain has always been known for being entrepreneurial and coming up with, new age ideas for disrupting the consulting world. We've done the private equity business consulting came out of Bain, and I can go on and on. But the Bain Innovation Exchange, as you rightly pointed out, is our way to say, okay, corporates tend to go in a direction. There is the startup world that's disrupting at all times. How can we bring these two worldviews together that are often parallel and not crossing paths? And that's what I'm doing right now. And so you asked me the question of, what does it take, right, to be successful or to develop a highly successful, competitive global business, a multinational firm. I'll add another couple of multis to your narrative. I think we function today in a very multi-dimensional, geographies, industries, talent kind of thing, and multi-speed world, right? Markets and customers and their sophistication and readiness vary so much across the world. And so really acknowledging that actually exists and the one size fits all doesn't really work is really important. I'll take an example. So, let's take talent and customer. It's a nice pair. I like to talk about it because I think of those as the two most important tenets of any business. In a global business, you are essentially tapping the highly talented, educated, smart people from around the world. And it is amazing how globally homogenous the top of mind issues are, no matter where you go, right, for that talent pool. Things such as who are you going to be working for? What does the company stand for? What's the ethos? What will you be learning? How will you grow? Very common. Anywhere you go, you will see that. Also equally insightful is the fact that the cultural nuances, though, can bring such differences in how it manifests itself, right? So for example, in some countries, and in fact, even in some companies, you'll see that work cultures can be very varied. In some places you go, you put your head down, you put in your X number of hours, you leave, and then you have a social life. In other places, you're there all day. You're stretching, you're at the pool table, you are, having those water cooler chats, and your best friends are made at work. And that can create all kinds of challenges when it comes to thinking about being competitive in a global setup. The talent question is a big one. Equally is the customer question, right? So in a multi-speed situation, customers are different, customer needs are different. While customer is always at the core of things, and you need to hone in on what problem you're trying to solve and to make sure that you're testing it regularly and you're evolving that over time. In some geographies, the level of sophistication is different than others. And so in our world, for example, when we were growing the BCN, some countries and some clients were looking for very basic research, and we wanted to give them the whole shebang, right? You need to recognize that, and you need to recognize where you need to be, and neutralize these sort of creations of unnecessary anxieties or friction points, if you may. So if I were to sum it up into like one lesson, if you may, I would say to be successful, you have to really hone in on this idea of customer and talent. Like it's a two in a box. You can't just go and say, I'm going to go think about the customer. I'm going to think about growing this business. You have to think equally, if not more, of sort of how are you going to serve that business and hone in and focus on the cultural nuances, knowing fully that in harnessing similarities and differences, you can actually function in this multi-speed and multi-dimensional world in very successful ways. And certainly for us, that was the case. We would go in, we would have a lot of systems that were very globally sound, but very quickly we would have to morph them into what was locally relevant for that particular customer and for that particular talent pool.
And that's so true. It rings true in so many levels, not just from the corporate world, but also working with startups. When you talk about the talent and the customer angles, they're fundamental to really driving the growth and the scale, especially when you're across geographies. And it's fascinating, as you were mentioning, you can have a certain corporation that has a very sort of well-known or reputable culture, but you go inside the corporation, you cross into a different department, and it's like a very different culture, right? I think those are some of the challenges that have to be regarded. Kind of going off the similar vein, it's often said in the corporate realm, and especially the world of strategy consulting, that these two fields are very myopic on some levels. Yet we know that there is a lot of innovation across industries. You're at a very, very unique place, right? Where you have one foot in the big corporate world and one foot helping drive innovations at startups. How can big established corporations around the world better position themselves for accelerated growth on those front lines of innovation with new startups that are perhaps not even on the radar yet?
No, you raise a really interesting question, and clearly, this is a question that has grappled many. I mean, it is about having a multi-pronged approach, as I call it. We often talk about not putting all your eggs in one basket, or rather avoiding that, right? And it's really important to activate that idea of a portfolio strategy in the context of innovation for corporates. It needs to be a spectrum. And, at the core of it, and starting at the very baseline, is inculcating a culture of innovation in-house. This is often overlooked, honestly, and, oftentimes a nice to have, if you may. In my opinion, innovation comes in many flavors. It's from the small little step change ways of looking at the same problem in a different, with a different vantage point, to big game-changing ideas for new businesses. But at the core is the ability to be open to possibilities, right? So there needs to be a big focus on sort of this idea of inculcating, like I said, a culture of innovation. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, there is this idea of harnessing the power of the startup ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Companies find it quite hard, I would say, for the internal innovation engine to kick in, because oftentimes there is a lot of reliance, if you may, on the mothership. And, in order to be able to do things in-house or to be as disruptive in-house, you do need the culture, but you also need the mechanism, if you may. And oftentimes, that means ring fencing, to have the freedom to explore the art of the possible, ensuring that there's a right balance of taking the best from the parent company, knowledge, expertise, warm leads into customers, introductions, those sorts of things, but always also being able to function with the sole goal of making business independently successful. And I think that's where the opportunity to work with startups and work with the ecosystem, such as yours, is hugely valuable. It can start with something as simple as piloting an idea or, just experimenting, but often can lead to deeper partnerships, joint ventures, investments, working with accelerators, incubators, and such. To me, morphing into an innovation machine can be challenging. And there's always this here and now that is making the company successful today. Equally true is that many great ideas fail and corporates are just not set up to have these kinds of bets, right? But I would argue that this is really not a choice anymore, and the world is evolving faster, much faster than ever before. And if I were to think about the last 12 months and what that has taught us even, is that customer needs are changing very rapidly. So the ability to react to them in a nimble way is about laying 1,000 bets and making this a top of mind sponsorship agenda to work with startups and really try to get that sort of hustler mentality into the corporation as a way to turbocharge this engine, if you may.
Exactly. It's so true, right? Especially now that you bring it up, the past 12 months have been a case study as to adapting to change, right? And we've seen that across the board around the world, and I think business is no exception. It goes without saying that our entire world has been changing faster than ever, let alone since the advent of COVID-19. The startup ecosystem has also been no exception to that. We've seen our very fair share of dynamism and just a lot of need to adapt to the changes, to the changing landscapes, markets, business models, as the world accepts a new normal. From your point of view, Sonali, what has been the single most remarkable trend that you have seen among corporates amidst the chaos of 2020?
When you originally asked me about this, and I was thinking about this, I think it's amazing how quickly we've adapted, don't you think? Honestly, I think of myself as very open to change, and yet if you'd asked me a year back if the whole world would go work virtually and remotely, I would have said,
right.
I'm not sure I would have said that's my answer, right?
Yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right? I would say crisis is the mother of innovation, if I may add to it.
Yes.
Take the VC world. I mean, it's so much a contact sport, right?
Mhm.
Yet today, the ecosystem is so much more global. I have seen so many companies from around the world, in every corner of the world. You're certainly experiencing the same with your most recent cohort. Without even setting foot away from my study. And we have really embraced this, right? So the world has gotten closer in many ways, and yet there is a diametrically opposite reality that in a number of places, the world has become very inward-looking, local, and globalization is dead. You hear those sorts of things, right?
Right.
This is another one of those very fascinating moments we're living in, a multi-vector world, right? Where we have the opportunity to be hyper-local. At the same time, we have the opportunity to be hyper-global. And so I think that's the single most remarkable trend, if I was to pick one, right? How do you capture the opportunity and focus on whatever it is you're passionate about or you have expertise in to find where you fit in this hyper local, hyper global economy. I heard a word the other day. It was called glocal. I don't know how I feel about that.
Localization. Yeah. It's McDonald's use that
There
that word a
you go.
lot for localizing.
Globalizing.
Right.
It's like that's it. That's it. Personally, I have been excited by the opportunity this presents. Take the example of EdTech, right? I have two kids, both of them are going to school, and this area is of deep interest to me. I've done some work in the after-school activity space and whatnot. I've been consulting a couple of companies. But can you imagine like what it is that we would leave behind for the next generation if there was just a better way to learn? And the possibility to learn from the best around the world, anywhere in the world, right? And do that sitting at your home is absolutely mind-boggling to me. You can get the best teacher in calligraphy for all you care from wherever in the world, to the best teacher in STEM to STEAM to what have you, right? There's that. And before it was about online learning was something that was coming. It's just accelerated completely, right? You leverage the best in class technology, you leverage the best in class collaboration tools, AR, VR, and think about I recently came across a company that is using some VR technology, AR technology, sorry, augmented reality to support kids in the space of special needs. Oh, wow. I was just fascinated by that, right? So those are the kinds of things where I think that hyperglobal can go to another level. On the other hand, this idea of connected locally, the basket of, I have huge potential opportunity to disrupt, this idea of I have 100,000 Facebook and other social media gaming friends. My kids, all their friends are on games.
Yeah.
But somewhere we're losing the sense of the neighborhood. And I think it's coming back through various apps. That's very local, eat local, eat what's in season. Don't leave a footprint on the world or leave a small footprint on the world. These are all things that are very, very local. I heard of a company doing something like an Uber for children recently, like mothers going around and being able to support each other in making some money, but also carpooling. There are lots of local ideas and lots of global ideas. I believe they will coexist. And I would say that's like to me, that's been the most fascinating trend as I think about opportunities in the world of business and startups.
That's very interesting. And I've seen that as well. I think part of it, as you mentioned initially, was sort of a nice to have, but with the pandemic, we've all kind of just had to do it, right? Especially when it comes to the online learning, remote work, right? A year or 2 years ago, if you asked most executives if they would embrace remote work, most of them probably would have said no. You come to the office and you work here, but 2020 didn't give us that luxury. You all just had to adapt to that change. And, you're mentioning some very interesting.
In some ways, you guys have been ahead of the curve at Newchip, right? You've always been remote, and it's worked pretty beautifully for you guys.
What's interesting, and I'll tie this to the next question that I have about strategy. Initially, our strategy has been online. That's been the strategy from the beginning. Build an online remote accelerator program to go to the entrepreneurs where they are, right? You shouldn't have to force entrepreneurs to come to the key hubs, right? The next Elon Musk could come out of Montana or Tasmania, Mongolia. Are we going to expect them to come to Austin or San Francisco or Hong Kong or Singapore? Maybe, but that limits the opportunity and the reach that we can have. So from the beginning, the vision was, how do we make the biggest impact globally? It's by going to them. And that's been a big part of our strategy. And it's worked, right? I don't want to call it a blessing, but it's been a blessing in disguise that COVID-19 has made it to where a lot of entrepreneurs just need to rely on something that's online and remote, and that's helped us. So I wanted to ask, on the same note, why does strategy matter, right? And not just for big corporations, but also startups and entrepreneurs. And I know this may seem like a silly question, but coming from one of the most prominent strategy consultancies in the world, why does it matter?
And I'm going to take the why does it matter to the world of entrepreneurship angle a little bit more. I'll go back to basic definitions here, right? What I learned in business school a long time ago, which is strategy is about allocations of scarce resources. It is so true in the context of startups, right? Startups by nature are a culmination of the hustle from the most tenacious people out there. Those that bubble to the top beyond the brilliance of an idea to show promise is really because somebody was at it, incessantly for the longest time, not giving up, right? And every step of the way, there is a choice to be made. Let's talk about that in a bit of a construct. If we were to think about what is the objective of your business and how much any action you take or any time you're spending will make on that objective, what progress will it make, right? It becomes a question about strategy, really, right? If you think about the concept of first principles and the definition. I often hear many entrepreneurs talk about, it's a good for my marketing, or I really think it's going to bring me customers, or I think it's going to motivate the talent. There's a lot of that touchy-feely side of it. Right. And this is where I kind of feel like, we need to move away and get into a little bit of an analytical construct. I often spend a lot of time peeling that sentiment, if you may, to actual numbers and say, okay, so if you're making choices, choices that will help you grow, whatever your growth goals are, help you make progress on those. What is the effort that you're going to put on this particular thing that you feel so passionate about, this choice that you're making? May it be like, I think, there is this tiny little growth market that I should tap now because somebody knocked on my door, sent me an email and said, we'd like to partner with you. How much time and what impact is it going to have on your growth targets? And, what will it take away from your individual energy and mind share or emotional power or just your capacity to do anything else? What are you going to give up? Right? And so the one thing that always is in short supply is resources and time related to it. And so I would say no matter what the size of your organization, strategy is about allocating that and making those choices and making choices which will often, put some things on hold. And knowing the direction of travel, right? Knowing how every action of yours is connecting to the question of your long-term goals and your long-term aspirations and the targets for your company. That's my view on this particular topic.
That makes so much sense. And I wanted to tie that to, you established the idea of a strategy, which makes perfect sense. Now, when we apply that, especially in the world of startups, with the ultimate goal, right, is to build something that works, that makes money, and that can scale. Scaling a business operation is always much easier said than done. And achieving global success in today's competitive environment, well, necessitates achieving scale to actually just win in the market you're in. In your experience, what are some of the challenges that businesses face when scaling their operation? And I recognize that you've worked potentially with some bigger enterprises, but how could you tie some of those to smaller companies like startups?
I'm assuming this is beyond sort of like the product market fit phase. Clearly, you need a business to scale it, and entrepreneurs by nature are hackers, so they are going to and can hack their way through for a very long time. I would say I'm amazed, often how long they can go before feeling a need to say we need to put the right construct, the right approaches, the right frameworks, the right processes, and things like that in place. And honestly, that's okay in my mind, right? I mean, it's okay as long as you're not making operational problems a band-aid solution to the point that it breaks. And it is a top priority. It is top on your priority list, right next to your steadfast focus on growth and customer acquisition and all those sorts of things. It's not somewhere at the bottom of your pile. And so through the whole first phase of the journey, you need to have a view towards what I call implementation, which is not often in the wheelhouse for entrepreneurs, right? That is not what they are passionate about. That's also not perhaps what they've done before. And so, I'll break it down into two or three different things, if you may. So first on my list is prioritization. I have a very simple mantra, everything is always a priority, but it does not have to be a priority at the same time, right? Do the mental exercise. Take $100, split it up on your list of to-dos, and see if everything has equal weightage, you have a problem. That's how I put it. So really solve for that first, right? It can be phased, it can be week by week, it can be daily, what have you, but really focusing on making sure that somewhere in your priority list, and you don't keep shifting that, is this idea that I need to identify when is that milestone that I'm going to have to start thinking about scale and what no regret moves I need to do now. Then the second is people. Attracting and hiring and retaining talent is an extremely time consuming and hard thing. Yet there are many people who want to work for startups, right? So I always test for skills, but hire for attitude and purpose, if you may. It's a two-way street, very much so today in the gig economy. I don't prescribe so much to the idea of employee-employer as much as I do to the idea of free agents. Both the company and the individual need to feel like there is some value creation in it for them. It's along the vector of learning, it's along the vector of the company goals, what have you. And while this exists, right, there's huge amounts of inspiration and crazy amounts of creation and teaming and all that. That's where the fun is. Right. But as companies grow, they need to keep sight of those early days of motivation on steroids, if you may, but also acknowledge and embrace the grown-up version of this, which is a culture of fairness and learning and transparency. So I think I would put priority and then people. And then beyond that, it's about processes, right? At some point, you're going to need to go beyond your Excel sheet and use a software and tool. So think about that milestone. Think about when you need to be prepared to do that. Spending too much time on it at a time when it doesn't matter to make everything scalable is certainly not the right answer. But at the same time, there are some no regret moves that you can take now to make sure you're scale ready. And so I'd say, priority, people, and processes in that order. Keep that on top of your mind, and also really think about scale not for scale's sake, but scale in the context of, how is it impacting your milestones and your ability to do more with less, if you may.
Absolutely. I mean, the 3 Ps, as you put it, prioritize, people, and then the third one, processes. We can't forget those, especially if you want to scale. I think it's so true, right? And we see that all the time at Newchip, where especially with the companies that are at the Series A level, they're already in a much more advanced growth stage, right? They're no longer playing ping pong, and they're meeting with big enterprises. They're growing at a different rate, and they have to start bringing very serious process to their corporation if they actually want to take it to that next level and be on the radar with the big players in their market. It's often that make or break point, right? When you go from 10 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 500 employees, right? And you almost witnessed that firsthand as you were building out at Bain. You know, it was about 500 consultants, right, that you created the team.
That's right.
So
and it was Bain, and there were all the, benefits of having the great brand and all that. But honestly, like I said earlier, when you're starting a different business, think of it as a separate business, right? So, take what makes sense, but also be willing to be independent.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's so important. I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit more towards the mindset of startups and the startup ecosystem. Obviously, you have a very fascinating perspective on this community. What do you think startups need now more than ever? And you can tie in 2020, we're in 2021, but all the big challenges that have come up over the past months and years. What do you think startups need?
So I'll take the immediate here and now, which I think is an age-old problem with startups, and then I'll go a little bit into sort of the more futuristic view on this particular question. Being a startup is not easy. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's easier said than done. I feel privileged to have said I've been there, done that. But I know what it feels like, right? And certainly many ideas never see the light of the day, not because they're bad ideas or there's no real need or you've got the product market fit wrong or something like that. It's just because someone lost tenacity to go that next day, right? It's an exhausting, lonely journey. And there's lots of advice out there. So too much of it, I would say, on some level. So from funding to talent planning to customer acquisition, et cetera, there's lots of advice. The needs have not changed. The sophistication level has, right? I've seen many business ideas lose momentum as they fail to inspire action from these various factions that they have: the customer, the employee, and the investor, right? So any hands-on deck support and services, things that can turbocharge outcomes in real tangible ways and help simplify the startup journey, if you may, is game, I would say. Take, for example, communications, right? As an example, the ability for a startup to convey the brilliance of the business idea is often, and unfortunately at times, what makes or breaks a deal. And this is again true for all those three factions, right? It is true for the customer, for the employee, as well as for the investor. Customers, for example, they're being bombarded with so many options all the time, so many new tools, so many apps for you to download and what have you. So unless you're solving for a burning need and there's no other choice out there, you better make a good impression quickly, right? So that's just an example of what startups need today, and companies that can solve for that. What things we take for granted as corporates, right? I would say companies that can solve for that raw basic need in startups, I think have real value to add to this ecosystem, because it's really a shame that sometimes the best of ideas don't see the light of the day for these sorts of reasons. And then I'll shift gears a little bit to this idea of, what's it going to look like, right, in the world of startups and corporations in the next 10-ish years. I would say 10 is a long horizon in this world. I won't go to the 20 or 30. I'll say 5 to 10 or less than that. There's likely to be many, many more experiments. Let's be honest, right? Both sides need each other, is how I feel about this topic, right? It's only a matter of timing and the alignment of needs or incentives and the recognition of value, if you may. So there'll always be a lot of experimentation and a lot of learning. But I feel like I honestly feel like we're nearing an inception point, a point of no return, as to this will become the new norm, if you may, a new way of doing business, a new way of uncovering the next product, a new way of finding those artisan brands, which will be a fresh offering to your customer. Mm-hmm. So the pace will multiply exponentially, and I think we're very close, or we probably are already at that inception point, because many companies, big corporations, are recognizing this today and are willing to pivot to that mindset and actually move a huge, very successful engine in a different direction because they are seeing their industry and its spaces being disrupted on an everyday basis, right? There's a lot of noise out there.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think it's, again, a very fascinating perspective that you bring, having a big view into how the corporates are thinking, but also the startups. And I agree. I think 10 years is an eternity in the world of startups. So that's typically, you know, the investment cycle for a VC on the upper end. In your experience, and I want to tie this a little bit more to sort of how the corporation and the startups, they form a dynamic, right? They have to work together. A lot of the startups that we see right now that are young, right, may be relatively unknown. They may be irrelevant to the big competitors, but who's to say that in 3, 5, 7, let alone 10 years, they're going to be the titans, right, of these new markets and industries. What are the key skills that you think CEOs, founders, leaders in startups need in order to rise and succeed, not just as any company, but highly reputable and respected global leaders, especially in today's, you know, super competitive and fast evolving world?
There is a full day session we can do on this topic, but I'll give you a very quick and simple answer. You know, I've said many times through this whole conversation that I honestly believe that, you know, it's customer first, but it's customer and people first. It's two in a box, as I call it. And the ability to stay nimble and move fast, and perhaps the most importantly, the ability to stay focused in a world of information overload. The ability to capture the signal from the noise. Perhaps those are the two big things, right? Always recognizing that you can't really or cannot really be functioning in a one vector world where there's the customer and that's the end all be all. You have to think of the talent side. And the second one is being able to kind of tease out. There's so much innovation. There's so many ideas out there. You know, how do you tease out the signal from the noise, as we say at the BIE? Is perhaps the two things that you need to hone in on to think about what success looks like in a fast evolving world.
Yeah, and I would push on the flip of that. What do you think right now is the most common mistake that entrepreneurs are making?
I'll take that question a little bit differently, if you don't mind. I hate to be, you know, talking about here are the 10 common mistakes and things like that. All of us are here to make mistakes. If we're not making mistakes, we're probably doing something wrong.
Exactly.
So this may sound cliched, but there's always a first time to do things, right? And the strangest thing is that most entrepreneurs are expected to know their business when most of the things they do, they're doing it for the first time. And so it's hats off to the entrepreneurs who figure things out, right? So I don't have a very long or short list, if you may, on the common mistakes, but I do have a few observations. And I kind of capture it in what I call the fight, flight, or freeze state of mind of running a business. This is usually used in the context of human behavior, but I like to use it just as a way to remind myself and other people who are listening to this. You know, there is three modes of your existence, of your being, or your way of thinking and working and functioning that you should watch out for. One is what I call fight, which is not recognizing that there is a mistake and living in a hubris of this is going to work because it's the best idea in the world and it's just a matter of time. Right? The other is what I call the flight, which is not analyzing. So you made a mistake, you kind of recognize it, you're feeling, you know, terrible about it, but not analyzing the learnings. And so sort of saying, okay, it's not going to happen again, right? Or this was a one-off, or, you know, shoving it under the pile and expecting it to be an anomaly. And then the last one is freeze, which is analysis paralysis. You get into a mode of this is, you know, again, I don't know if you want to put this on video, but the ocean moment, as we have called it sometimes, which is you're analyzing nonstop, and so you cannot get out of the indecision challenges, right? So if you kind of think about, it's almost like I put you in a little corner between a rock and a hard place and say you can't fight, you can't flight, you can't freeze. So where do you go from here, Sonali? I think it's just recognizing that every situation, it will be, you know, you just have to identify what is happening and trying to sort of maneuver based on what's happening. If you're getting into a mode of not making a move when all the answers are not there, that's not the right answer either. So really recognizing when you need to pivot, but not pivoting too quickly. It's an art.
Right. Right. No, as you were describing that, I was just imagining that cycle, the iteration cycle that, a lot of startups embrace, right? Lean startups, especially, where the goal is to fail fast, right? If you're going to try it, you're just going to like fail, break it. And then, but as you said, make sure that you're learning from it, right? There's no point in just discarding the facts. There's no point in not wanting to learn about it, maybe because of ego, right? And again, I think tying this to what you initially said, a lot of entrepreneurs oftentimes don't have a clue as to what they're doing, but they have a dream, they have a vision. I think having the openness and the willingness to learn from those mistakes and making mistakes is important, right? Because as you said, if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not doing something worthwhile, meaningful, or something that's going to actually change the game for your business over the long run. But I do think, especially the paralysis side, right? It's so true. And I've seen so many founders oftentimes just get lost in the weeds, right? Of a ton of data, trying to analyze things that keeps them immobile, right? From actually taking action and making mistakes and failing, right? So that they can say, that didn't work. We're going to move on to the next part of the strategy. So that makes perfect sense. Just go out there and just keep trying. This has obviously been a lot of really good insight, Sonali. The last question that I have, what actionable advice would you give to entrepreneurs who genuinely want to build companies that make an impact in this world, that change the world for a very long time?
I'll keep it very short. I'd say stay curious and run a marathon, not a sprint.
I love that. And I agree. I think in starting a company, creating something out of nothing, you're not sprinting, right? You are running a marathon. You're in it for the long run. Most VCs are anyway. They're not here to get in, get out. They're here to be your partners for many, many years. So that's a very good reminder for everybody in the audience who's thinking that this startup thing that you're doing is a sprint. It's not. It's a marathon. So you gotta stick it out for the long run. Sonali, thank you so much for taking the time out of your super busy schedule to be here with us today. Really appreciated learning so much about your experiences, your perspective, and your insight. And I hope that we can see you here again soon in the future.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.